Well, have these guys been doing a good job so far with all this going on? What a blessing, huh? Amen. Yeah. Well, I'm George Stinzel. Larry introduced me, and this is this little thing I put together on the Buck 110s, and I hope it's useful for everybody that's here. You know, go on. I got this little mouse here that I got to use, and hopefully I'll get used to it. And if not, somebody can hold my hand. Hey, first step looks pretty good. It's a first version, Buck 110. There's around 700 of them made. Steel spacer in the back. And the steel spacer is also the lock spring. It's integrated into one piece, you know.
George, excuse me, let me interrupt you a minute. Larry, could you do away with get these lights turned off so we can see that screen better? Oh, there you go.
Are you going to pass out a flyer when you get through that's got all this in it? Like they did yesterday?
You know, the last one I did, I made CDs, but I was unable to do it this time because I worked up until the last minute till I got here. But I'll make some available if you want to, you know, get my information. I'll get one made up, burn one for you or whatever, and you know, you can have it for, you know, reference.
This will be on the video.
Okay. So, yeah, these had a real thin blade in them, very, very thin. They were die-cast brass. They're studded on one side. They're actually sandwiched together where the studs protrude out of one side and they're sandwiched, so you know they were peened on one side to kind of hold them together. And they're also, let's see, I can't remember if those have the bushing or not. Some of the early ones that were studded also were bushed. It wasn't just a stud, but there was a bushing in there for the blade to actually seat itself down into it. And that's when you see some of them, when they get a little worn in and they get a little blade wobble to them and stuff, you know, there's no real way to tighten them up. Next is first version Type 2, rare etched. I believe there was right around 2,000 of these done. Has the same thin blade, steel spacer. The way I understand it, the first ones they did, the first blades they stamped, because they were so thin, they fractured from the stamping. They were having a problem with that. And so they went into this brief etching, you know. As far as I understand, some of them were, yes. They were old files, some of the blades were. And you can kind of see as it progresses along, you know, how the tang is and the chamfer on the blade and the nail nicks and all these different little things that come into play on these knives as they progress through, and just kept refining this knife. That's kind of the mark up close. These are pretty rare knives to find too, because actually in all the years that I've collected, it took me the longest to get my hands on one of these, you know, because a lot of them, the etch wore off, you know, and nobody knew what the knife was, you know. There was just nothing on there, you know. If you used it a lot or, you know, clean your blade a lot or whatever, the etch would just disappear. And it was done opposite side of the nail neck, just like the first version that was stamped, but the etch kind of moves around too. You can kind of tell if you've seen a few of them, you know. Sometimes it'll be way up right against the top of the blade, or it might be down lower in the middle, or yeah, it kind of wanders around that stamping. It's not in one particular spot. That's first version type 3. There's actually two styles of that. There's the one that has the buck dot stamping and one that just says buck on it. And that's got the red micarta spacer. That one there is when they had went from the integrated steel spacer to this fiber spacer, and the lock spring that goes up from this micarta fiber spacer actually protrudes itself into the lock bar of the knife. There's a hole drilled in the lock bar, and that spring will come out of that spacer and go into that little hole in that lock bar. It doesn't just rock on the lock bar itself, where it has a little nick groove in it. It actually, there's a hole that goes up in there. I think a number on that was around 5,000 or something on those produced. Next one is it's either a first version type 5 or second version type 1. I call it a transition because it has the integrated brass frame with the horizontal stamp. And interesting thing about these is that these seem to be really, really hard to find too. I was fortunate enough to find this one brand new in the box with the paperwork, sheath, and everything. And so when I had seen it, at first I had thought maybe seeing the integrated brass frame with the horizontal stamp in an older knife, I thought, well, maybe, it had a blade change at one time or another. And then when I had seen this one, I said, wow, it convinced me they did produce some of these. It was probably the last of the horizontal stamp one-liner blades, and they put them in the new, integrated brass frames. So that's a real fun one to look for. I seen one of these go on the internet. It was over in Kai, Japan. Guy had it with the box and everything, and I bid on it, but I was a little leery to bid a whole lot on it because of the fact that it was all the way over in Japan, and I thought, wow, you're taking a little bit of a gamble, So, but that's a good one to try to find. Now we have a second version type 1, 1966. This was probably the closest one I found with the horizontal, or the stamp down on the tang. If you look at that, right at the tang, how that is grinded and cut right there. If you go back, let's see, how do I back this thing up? See how it does the same thing on that one with the horizontal stamp right there at the grind line? But now it's down on the tang, the stamping from up top. So that was about the closest that I wanted to call a type 1 second version because of that, how that's designed right there. I thought, that's probably what came next. Now we have a type 2. That one has, let's see, okay, the first one has the buck dot stamping up there too. This one just has buck. And you can kind of see now the grind line and stuff's changing a little bit, and the chamfer a little more on the blade. I have the original receipt on that, and that was November 1st, 1966 on that one there.
Small nail nick.
Yep. This is the first Buck USA. I have the paperwork also on this one. The original receipt on it was 1967. Has the struck nail nick appears on these first Buck USA stampings too to be thinner even as the previous ones. It has a very thin one. for some, right at that time. Some of them are just real minute on those first Buck USA stampings. Next we have the Type 4, no handle pins. So I have part.
All that model, none of them had handle pins, or is that just a variation on that?
Variation, yes. As I'm running through this, I have first version, second version, third version, fourth version, and they're variations. Because when I started collecting, there wasn't any collecting books or any way to put it in, a format. And so when Vern Taylor and Bernard Levine came out with the first book that actually showed, a little bit on the 110s, I kind of followed that line, as I went through with collecting, because that was the first one. And so everything I've done from that point has been first, second, because then it gets up to the date codes, and once you hit your date codes, you know what's going on. So yeah, this one has no handle pins. And you can, a lot of times if you look down into the frame of the knife, you can see some of them been modified. You see them, there'll be holes down inside the frame. The ones that were true, most of the time, don't have holes in there. They weren't drilled. You'll look down in there and you'll see that no handle pin knife, there was no holes ever drilled for those pins. It's just slabbed on there.
USA now, this was the first USA, was it the Type 3? For the USA, Buck USA. On the Type 3.
Type 3, yes, sir.
Type
Yes.
3 was the first USA.
Yeah, or you could call it second version variation 3.
Yeah.
Next we have the Type 5 or variation 5 with the stamp reversed on the back side of the blade.
George, back up to the no handle end of it. If the frame was drilled, then you think it could have gone back to the factory and had to be put new handle slabs in?
Possibility maybe, or some kind of modification of some sort or another. Now on this one too, also you'll notice that handle pins and the rocker pin, protrude out. They're not sanded off. So this could be, the next one I'm going to, you can see sanded. So there's a little, that one maybe came after the next one, because it kind of, as it progressed, you see the sanded handle pins, and then later on you see the handle pins protrude out, the rocker pin. Type 6, now you're seeing the more definite machine nail neck. And on these, once again, this one has sanded handle pins here, and but you'll see that one with the one like up above too, with just the handle pins protruding out.
All before it was struck nail nick?
Yeah, well, you can see now. Another funny thing is going back up to the one with no handle pins. You see where the nail nick is on that one? Most of the ones that were done with no handle pins have that nail nick up real tight next to the chamfer there, and it's struck kind of small, but it's struck deep. And I've noticed that basically just on those ones with the no handle pins.
So they are struck as opposed to being machined.
Yes. Well, that could be. Joe, what do you, on that? Do you know if that was struck, just a light struck or machine done on those early ones with the no handle pins?
Right now, to go back and check all the old ones I got to see if there's a way to
definitively, under magnification, it's starter.
Sometimes you can see the little machine marks. Right.
Interesting.
So George, on the no inlay one, another unique thing, I don't know if you've seen it too, they tend to be more swell centered, and oftentimes the wood is look like a castle.
You're exactly right. You're exactly. This is another thing I'm coming across. Well, right here, what we're headed into now, I have ebony or rosewood, because these are second versions, and look at the grains on that. These are ones that I've noticed that when you know, on the ebony, when you look at it a lot of times, it'll have a light grain on the face. You turn it sideways, it'll be real dark or black, or you'll see those black lines in it or whatever. These ones here, what you see there is what you get all through and through on both sides of the knife, and as you look, either way onto the frame, it's light through and through. And I always put a question there, wow, did they get a run of rosewood or something? And hey, looks good. I mean, it makes a really pretty handle. That the first one I have up on there has sanded handle pins, and let's see, yeah, that one there. I'm kind of over here at an angle, so I'm trying to, look at on the rear bolster of that one has a single pin right in the middle on that one. And sanded handle pins.
So the pins are not necessarily a giveaway, because you've got, it almost looks like 3 different pins.
Yeah, on those integrated brass, some of them were studded, and you'll see on one side, you'll see 2 bolster pins at the rear. Some of them you'll see with that single pin in the back. Some of them you'll see all the way through. You turn it over and you see bolster pins on both sides on the integrated brass. This one here, large handle pins. If you take a note, protruded large handle pins like you're going to see later on the 2-dot. But that's the only ones that I've seen with large handle pins at that time. And I've also seen them, the second version frame like that, large handle pins, but ebony. Not the light grain, but actually a real dark, ebony look too with large handle pins. So, there's a couple to look for like that there. You'll find one with that real light grain, and you'll also find one with the dark ebony that has the large handle pins. And then let's see, the next one, we've got sanded handle pins with the light grain. I put that one in there, and I believe this one here has the 2 bolster pins, visible. You might not be able to see them in that picture, but that has the 2 bolster pins, whereas these here have the little, you can kind of see the little round single bolster pin there. And that's visible on both sides, that bolster pin. Now next we have the 3rd versions. These were forgings by Revere. And they jump up in size. The previous frames, the integrated brass frames, were pretty thin, right around a 1/2 inch thick. These jump up, they're a little thicker. Some of them are very, thicker than others too, kind of depending on how they were sanded and, done up. But the first one, I have right around I have the date on that, around 1970. At the time when I was buying a lot of these knives, it was done, a lot of these were bought back in the 70s. And when I went to gun shows and stuff, I tried to have a tendency to ask if I got one in the box with the paperwork, because at this time I was trying to date these knives. And so I would ask the people, whoever I was buying it from, and some people know, they'll tell you, I bought that knife, and other people, well, maybe, So anytime I got a definite answer on something, I would turn the box upside down and write on it. So I could kind of, track this down to figure out, to get it in this pattern here. Well, I guess for the seminar today. I didn't know I'd be doing a seminar, but So that's a third version type 1. It has a brass rocker pin and a brass spacer. That kind of shows you, the spacer in the back, what you're looking for, instead of the integrated brass frame where the spacer is all one piece and it's 2 frames sandwiched together. You're actually seeing, 2 frames with a spacer, a piece back there now. Next we have type 2 or variation 2, steel rocker pin. Okay, type 3 is steel rocker pin, steel spacer. I call this the last 2-liner. Shows you're going into your steel spacer now. Next we have type 4. That's first stamping Buck 110 USA. And this is Buck 110 USA with red with the tip pointed up, not down.
George, back to your previous slide, the one with the steel spacer. The ones prior to that with the brass spacer, sometimes because the patina gets on that brass, it is hard to see that line. I've looked at those before just quickly, and I thought to myself, that's an integrated one. I thought, that's too wide to be an integrated. Well, then if I wiped it or rubbed it on my jeans or something and looked at it, you can see the definite crease of those lines. But sometimes they blend in, so don't just think that that's an integrated one. It's thicker, and you will see that line if you wipe it off a little bit. Have you run into those? They're hard to tell sometimes, especially if the light's poor.
Yeah, or they're real clean. Sometimes a real clean one too will look like it's just all one, you know what I mean? It looks really just pristine, in the back. Now we got a third version type 5 reverse stamp frame change. This is probably where I was inspired to collect. When I first started collecting, I want to go back. This is getting mysterious. Somebody doing something? Did I really not get that much sleep last night? Because I was hearing that last night.
We didn't hear it. What are you talking about?
That's what I love about doing this, it. Man, it just puts a smile on your face the whole time you're here. Actually, when I first started, this is the one that I had, was this 3-liner. But the guys I had grown up around and stuff, my brothers and stuff, had the next one up, the last 2-liner. And so when I had bought mine, one of the first things to do as a kid was to compare yours to somebody else's, And so this was the first comparison I had, was I had seen the 2-liner with the steel spacer, rocker pin. My new one at that time was the 3-liner. Now my buddy down the street, we were in a skateboard competition, and so when I got my knife, he had to have his. And it took him at that time we had 2 places we could get buck knives at. We had Ski and Sport, and we had Gene's Trading Post. And right around at that time also, you would walk in and see the buck display. The 110s were always gone. 112s I didn't even know existed at the time. You would never see a 112. They would come and go. As soon as they would get them, poof. You would see all the fixed blades. You would not see, you'd see a little spot that said Folding Hunter with a little red tag there, but you would not see the knife and it'd be gone. So it took him about 6 months to get his. And I remember when he got his had this reverse stamp on it. That was in 1974. And so right at that time, I thought to myself, you know, Buck must be date coding these knives, because they have one stamp that says Buck USA, one that says 110 USA standing up, one that says 110 USA upside down. That was what had gone through, what was my mentality at the time, and I thought, I ought to maybe collect some of these and keep them around, because most people that have them use them and they don't save them. And that kind of kicked off the collecting there. So we had the reverse stamp, and the frames changed right at that time too. Now, you know, theory has it or whatever that sintered brass came in around 1974. These frames did change in 1974. If you look at them, they look more like the forged frames. But they're actually a little different. If you look at these compared to the early ones I showed you, the Revere forgings, these frames are different. And actually, if you do any work on buck knives, you'll see they sand differently and they pin differently than the earlier. The forgings seem to be a little harder. So I don't know if these are forgings of a different type, or these were the first sintered frames that looked like forgings. A quick way to tell is, let me go back for a minute. See the layout on the handle pins? You've got your handle pins like this, and like this. Okay, now let's go back. I'm getting pretty good with this now. Previous. It's not next, it's previous. Now, these handles were black glued at the time. And so when they black glued them, they glued them and then they smashed them together. And then they drilled them. And then when they drilled them, they drilled a consecutive, the holes were all drilled at one time. So if you look at the pattern of the Revere forgings, the inlay pattern stays the same throughout all of these on the pins. See how your pins are all right in the same spot? Also, these frames are pretty, if you really look at them, they're real close to the same. You know what I mean? The precisionness, the sanding, you know, is a little different. It's going to be, but overall, you can tell these forged frames from this next set of frames. Also, on this stamping here, the first one, if you get in the habit of, if you're looking for this particular one and you see this setup, you'll see a deeper thumb depression. And the stamping, if you look at it with a loop, will say Buck 110 USA. The second one on the 110 will always touch the S on the USA, unless there's been a blade change at one time. Then you might see a little variation. But the rule of thumb is I've owned probably 30 of these. So I would say that's pretty good to, you know, say that stamping is what's going to be on that knife.
George, a question. Is the line stamping on that bottom 110, is it inverted? Because I can't tell.
No, it's Buck 110 USA right at the tip up.
And you think that preceded the inverted one?
I know it did.
Really?
Yes. Because you'll see here, if you look at these frames, just like I'm saying, thickness, and once again, like I said, Buck 110 USA, the one, the second one is actually touching the S on the stamping. You look at it with a loop, it'll always be like that, always. Unless there's been a blade change. I have probably 4 or 5 of those new in the box. So that kind of proved to me that was that stamping at that time. And that's 73 is when I bought mine. That's the one I have with that stamping. So, and my buddy bought his inverted stamp right in 74. And I remember going actually down to Gene's Trading Post and seeing the display of the inverted stamps. And do you recall, now I'll tell you another way to look. Remember that book I gave you in Idaho? The red book that said Knives by Jack Lewis? Okay, there's that book there that was done by Jack Lewis has the Almighty Buck. Have you read that? If you look in there, at that time, that was done in '73, that book. The pictures you'll get out of there is that 110, and you'll get the Black Micarta 112 at that time in '73. In that book, the pictures. That's why I gave you that book, because it's so informative. Another interesting point that I noticed when I started collecting early on, the Akanua and the Kalinga, I remember when we first started seeing those, we were seeing the Akanua and the Kalinga with inverted stamp first, you know, before we seen them with the tip bred up. They were like inverted, it seemed like they were inverted first, but the inverted fixed blades and the 110 came out later. And I'll show you another little reason to this summary on it. See, now when you go back to this frame, and this is one of the things too, is I thought this is that a frame change, because now we have the handle pins. This one's kicked way to the back. It's not in the same spot. It's when if you get this and hold this one or this next one up to the previous one that I had showed you, the forging, they'll be different. And these frames will be different. Like I said, if you sand these frames will sand real easy. The forging sand hard. That stuff's hard. That old forged metal, or the brass, oh man, it's hard. So, and since my buddy had bought his, you know, in '74, I came to the conclusion between the handle pins, the thickness of the frame, we had a frame change in 1974. And so there it is, 1974. I got 73, 74. I actually did it like that because I was thinking, well, maybe at the factory it got stamped inverted in around 73, hit the market in around 74. See, now we have the next style. I have what, third version type 6. See these 3-liners too, it's showing you how many little variations are just in your 3-liners, you know. And now, bless you. Next you can see the stamp goes back up, Buck 110 USA, but it'll change. It doesn't, the one on the, it doesn't touch the S on that particular stamping. Now it starts changing a little bit, and as you can see up there on the inverted, it doesn't either, you know. That stamping, if you look at it with a loop, it changes a little bit. And if you look at the frames, if you stand the frame up and look down inside the frame here and stuff, on these, you'll see a variation in your bolsters sometimes. They'll be, you know, kind of like this, or one will be taller than the other. But if you go back to the forgings, they're not like that. Now I put Sintered frame on this one because obviously it is a thicker frame. You know, it jumps up from these previous two to a lot thicker frame. Visible bolster pin. Those for some reason had a real, Leroy calls it ring around the rivet, but all those right at that time had a visible bolster pin. I remember another one of my buddies bought one of those, and right at that time, I said, well, I wonder how come and it seemed big, you know, the bolster pin compared to these seemed like it was big. And then once again, I thought, well, yeah, they must have a new idea for the bolster pin. And another, now on these Sintered brass, one of the ways, the early ones to look at it was this, the visible pin, thicker frame, right in here around the notch. It's always real thick right through here. You got a thick up here. They're thinner, and here it's a lot thicker. Thumb depressions more shallow. And the earliest ones of these, if you look on the inside of them, they're sanded. But then as it progressed along, they turned where they started being smooth on the inside. So there's another little variation just between this one here and another, say, sintered brass frame. You can look inside, say this one here, it'll be sanded. The next one you might look at will be smooth on the inside. And it kind of seemed like it progressed that way, you know, along. Once again, you want to look at your inlay pins, how it was drilled. Because now it changes again. Now we're almost straight across on these. See that? Whereas now these ones here are kicked. These are going straight across. I don't know why we're pointing at that one, but let's point at the first one with the laser pointer. Okay, that one's a fourth version. We'll call it type 1 since we're pointing at type 2. First version type 1, sintered brass with the first 2-dot stamping. And once again, you can kind of see what's going on with your handle pins here, straight across. So you have your sintered brass frame and your inlay pins shooting straight across from each other with the first 2-dot stamping. I'm going to go back for a minute. You can kind of see the same layout here on your handle pins for your drilling pattern, you know. Same thing. If you hold them up, if you take the sintered brass, you know, 3-liner, and then take your first 2-dot, and those inlay pins will line up the same. They were drilled the same way. There's your, you know, first. Now another thing that's real interesting too, or no, let's see, that comes a little later. I'm jumping the gun here. Too many cups of coffee this morning. So, okay. All right, next we have the fourth version type 2 with 4 inlay pins. Now, the story that Mac had given me on this was at that time with the sintered brass frames got a little thicker and a little bigger, and they quit gluing the handles. They just started pinning them. So he told me that they were having a little problem with the handles wanting to come a little loose and wiggle a little bit in the frames. So they decided, you know, to beef up the back side where it was wiggling a little bit. So the idea was to go to 2 handle pins. Well, they didn't want to sand out any more at the time with the single handle pin, and they had already been done, so they went ahead and drilled the other 2 and pinned them like that so they wouldn't have any coming back, you know, with handle problems. So they did that, and then once they did that run, they went to this next configuration here, to the 2 handle pins in the back, you know, of the handle there.
How many on the 510? Not too many.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of those. Doesn't appear like there was a lot of those done. And I think even the 112 was more scarce on that.
So those medium pins on that, medium size?
Yes. So next we got fourth version type 4, 78 to 79, 3 large handle pins. Now, another thing I had noticed on these, on the very first ones that were pinned with the large handle pins, you'll see the older stamping, Buck with 2-dot USA. Then during that same time frame, it jumped up to bigger, bolder letters on that stamping. So the very earliest ones of this configuration you might find with this, the smaller Buck 2-dot 110 USA, and then it jumps up to a bolder print, Buck 110 USA 2-dot. Also too, the very earliest sintered brass 2-dot, the grind line on the very first ones that I had noticed was real tight. It went almost right up against the Buck lettering, And then it kind of blossomed into this, more of the grind line came back more this way and stuff. But of the earliest 2-dot, if you got your eyes open for old 110s and you see a 2-dot, where your grind line will stay real tight to the buck letter stamping right there, those were right after the 3-liner and went into the 2-dot. We got 4th version type 5 3-dot stamp. I have right around 1981. And that was stamping to show that they added a bushing in there on the bolster pin. And who was I was talking to yesterday about the 3-dot. If you look close at some of the 3-dot blades, you'll notice the nail nick on the 3-dot is usually just a hair different than the 4-dot. It's in a little different position and done a little bit differently. There's your 3-dot stamping. Fourth version type 6, 4-dot. Now see how the nail nick is? Little more of a rounded, there's more of a radius, not a sharp edge to it. It's got more of a radius to it and stuff, so you can kind of tell the difference even in the blades there. And even the chamfer is a little sleeker coming down on the 4-dot. So that's, I have as type 6. That's the more squared off frame. So 4-dot stamping. And then this is the next one, type 7. You have your radius frame. And that's pretty much stayed the same, that frame, ever since.
George, could you remind people what the 2-dot, 3-dot, 4-dot significance was? Because there's some people here that don't know what the 2-dot signifies.
Yeah, the 2-dot, when it first came out, the lock bar was changed and the tang was changed. So you couldn't, at the time, the older 110s, they called them a gravity knife, where you could actually hit the button and the blade would and come around. They changed that setup so the blade, would not drop down into position and come back, cut your fingers or whatever, So the tang was changed, the lock bar was changed, and they stamped it buck with the 2 dots on each side of the 110. Then on the 3-dot, that's when they went to a bolster bushing where the blade actually rides on a bushing rather than on the bolster pin itself. So it acts as a bearing in there, so it opens smooth, you keep your oil down in there, it locks up nice and tight. Then the 4-dot was a change from the 440 to 425 modified. And that shows you when you see the 4-dot that your steel was changed in your blade.
So everything prior to that was 440C.
Yes. We have the first version Sheath. Before I had a display, and I didn't have his display. I didn't know Larry's was here. He's got good examples over there of this stuff, kind of what I'm going through right now. First version Sheath I have from the first 110, 64 to around 66 is what you would see for your sheath at that time if you were looking for a particular sheath for a knife of that era. Soft leather. Just buck on the button, and that's it. No other markings other than buck on the button. Very, very soft leather. Years ago, I was down at the Del Mar Gun Show, and a guy had a whole box of these, brand new ones for $1. And I wasn't experienced enough at the time And I looked and I said, hey, and these Buck would never make them like this. They're flimsy, you know, because I was used to the more, you know, stouter type sheath, you know, not thinking, hey, maybe this stuff's, you know, I was onto something, didn't even know it. So I just threw it back in the box and walked away. Now I'm like, man, I sure wish I had some of those. Let you know, you just never know.
Hey, George,
Were they tan?
Yeah, some of them were.
Do you know about how many, does anybody know roughly that early tan, how many made it out?
Yeah, there's no records of that. I thought this says very few.
I'd sure like to get one.
I only know of a couple. Yeah. It has to be few. I've only seen 3 or 4 in all the years I've been collecting.
Yeah. So yeah, there were some tan ones. Yes. Next we have this was in the box of the first Buck USA stamping with the thin nail neck. Now you have Buck stamped in the leather and on the button. The belt loop on the back, you know, you can see it's kind of tooled leather around the edge, but you don't have any 110 on it yet. It just is, that's what you see is what you get. Kind of thin, you know, kind of a thinner, taller sheath. Next we have this style. Joe has paperwork on this too, right, Joe, with the different companies that did this, the leather sheaths at the time?
Yeah, this was the dimple sheath because the rivet got dimple in it. And the model number goes on the belt loop. And we used this company for like 1 year, Atkinson leather. Usually, I believe it's 1669.
There's no buck on
No buttons.
No.
There's something on it.
It says buck stamped in the leather up high, but on the snap itself it's smooth.
And that's going to be true for fixed blade knives as well. Right.
Yeah, like the early Nemos, they came out in 68, they'll be in dimple sheath too.
Next we have where the 110 went up on top of the belt loop. And the first ones of these didn't have the little pins up here at the edge. You know, later on they put a little pin right here to kind of hold the stitching in. But the early ones had 110 up here at the top and no pins right at the top there. It just says sewn right up and stops. And I have that like listed around 1969, I believe, on that, 1970, something.
Yeah, I know it's a little. The 110 sheets, I don't think they follow the same path as the fixed blade. I think they kind of went a little different way.
Yeah, because actually I have a couple of the integrated brass frame knives that I have that have the protruded handle pins, have these sheaths. And they were dated around 69 is what they were dated, so with what I could gather, you know, at the time. So
In 69, we were with Atkinson for that 1 year, 68, 69, and then we pulled it all in-house and started making them on shelves. With fixed blade, you'll know because there's no tooling lines on the belt loop. I don't know if it's the same with the 110.
now next is basically the same, but now you can see the little rivet there where the stitching comes up and then it's stopped with the little rivet right there. It still has the 110 up at the top. I have these dated right into 1970 with the forged frames. And next we have 110 down below the belt loop. And that, when I bought mine, that's where it had the stamping out was right there at. So I would say probably 72, 73, right in that era is when they went to the 110 down below the belt loop.
Have you guys noticed it all?
Sheaths, especially where the rivets are, how some of them are gold, some are black. Have you ever seen that, Joe?
Well, on the earlier ones from the 60s, sometimes they're chrome on the front. And I found some correspondence between Buck and one of the two companies back then. They had a weird name for those, but it talked about we need to add those. They called them tacks or some a word that didn't sound like what you call them. You know, I call them rivets or buttons or something. They had some other name for them. That was with one of the sheath suppliers. I don't know when we started making them what they evolved into.
Now, is that stitching without a groove? Is that sort of like the fixed one you're talking about? Fixed sheet, when you start making about? Stitching? Did you say they didn't have the groove with the stitching?
No, the actual the leather of the belt system, along the edges there'll be a line pulled into it. Kind of decorated line.
Okay.
That previous sheath picture that had one, I don't know if you can go back to it or not, George, but you can show that. Go
Oh, I
back,
see, yeah.
go back one more. There, right there. It's on the belt loop, showing that. There it is, right there.
That one will always stand out to you too, because it has the 110 stamped on the belt loop, and it has those. Actually, you know, I've seen these without the steel pins in them too. I have a couple that has the 110 on the belt loop tooled, but there's no rivets or whatever, you know. There's no rivets. It's just stitched.
Then next we have the sheath, a more of a hard style sheath with a real small belt loop. I believe these came in, as I recall, with either the 3-dot or the 4-dot. And it has a higher, the one I showed previously has more of a holster type grab. You open it up and you can grab the knife out of there. This is a higher, it's higher up in the sheath. The knife rides down into the sheath. It's the leather just kind of goes up and just chops itself off. It doesn't come down and loop around like the earlier ones did. And like I said, it has the shorter belt loop. And I'm thinking, I think those the 3-dot or the 4-dot is when those came out, when you started seeing those. Paperwork, 64 to 66. What you'll see if you get a, one in the box and you want to try to, if you don't have your paperwork, or if you do, that's a good chance of what you're going to see. I have a brand new first version 110 new in the box, and this is what came with it.
Those are separate sheets of paper too, guys.
Yes.
You just put them all on one screen.
Yeah. You get your little guarantees, like a little brown and white paper, and you have your use and care. It comes down, and then this little section here is its own separate piece.
Reed, what did it say about the blade in number 1? Cut blade
1.0 carbon weight.
or carbon? What did that say?
Carbon razor type steel.
Yeah. Chrome, 19% chrome added to help make it rust and corrosion resistant. Keep your blade clean, however. Never submerge knife in hot water, but clean with damp cloth and dry thoroughly. Knives stored for long periods should be inspected occasionally for signs of moisture on blade or sheath. There's another, I think it's on this one too, is the blade is semi-hollow ground and comes to you sharp but not honed.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting, huh? Sharp but not honed. To hone, use a buck, stone, and cutting oil. I had that sharpening $1, there. I thought that was pretty cool at the time. And then you got your Federal Boulevard, address here, and that's pretty neat. I mean, as you collect along, when I was younger, it was finding the knives. As I get older, it's like a box or a paper or something. It's like, wow, man, you know, the heck with the knife. I want a paper, man. Next, I have 66 to 68 and sharpening $2. And we're still at Federal Boulevard. And I have two types here. I have this one was a long piece here with a little tips and care pamphlet that came. And then I have another one that actually came with this one here. And also, these had the other little paper that we were back with the registration card comes in there too with those.
Have you seen the registration card that was the one piece not perforated? That one on your previous slide, you fill out the bottom and you tear off the bottom and send it in.
Uh-huh. I think so. I think so. I think I have some that are just a registration card too. You don't.
Christian messages back then in the 60s?
No. To my knowledge, when I bought 110s, I bought them as they changed all through the 70s. The first one with the Christian message by Al Buck that I noticed was around 76.
Okay.
And what a good idea, huh?
It's so
Many
interesting.
people are sending those registrations. We actually did get it once, did you? Yeah.
So next we have 69. Sharpening still $2, but you have the 1717 Magnolia and then the switch over to P.O. Box 1267. $70 to $72 has your little orange label in there, this, and then your little smaller type, you know, use and care, but no date code. And these I found in the early forged frames, the Revere forged frames, that were, you know, right in the early 70s. I noticed it didn't have a date code yet, and sharpening was still $2. This is, I put as the first date code that I knew of, was down here in the corner, 4472. A lot of you probably see that. There was tons of those. Those went out for a long time. Because when I first bought mine, I remember seeing that and I thought, wow, was my knife made in 1972 when I bought my first one? Because I seen the date code. And as my buddy that bought the inverted stamp 3-liner, his said 4472. Sintered brass, some of those said 44. So there was a lot of those papers ran and sent out, you know. Probably an overabundance of those were ran off and sent out. So that's I put up there at the top, commonly found from 72 to 76. Some of you follow the internet or anything, you'll notice a guy will get his hands on one of these and, hey man, this thing was made in 72, you know. Not always true. Next week. Now these have date codes down in the corner, but I guess we kind of cut those off. One says one of 73 and the other one is 76. Also the sharpening on the previous one jumps up to $3. And this one goes from guarantee to limited guarantee, which is you know, a little clue when you're looking in there what to kind of look for. You know, 78, and there's your message. I put it in there up on the, actually I had that, it was supposed to turn around the other way, but something went on there. $4 sharpening, and once again you got like down here, you know, I think I stopped right here because now you're getting your date codes pretty, you know, at the time with the knife and stuff, so I kind of stopped off the paperwork right there. Next we go into the 112s. I just kind of line these up. 112 started around 72. First one was black micarta handle. I had a brass spacer, blade stamping, Buck USA. So I have it listed, you know, as a first version 112 type 1 or variation 1. Am I missing anything here on the 112, the first one?
Yeah. The first one had the Carter spacer.
No, brass spacer on the 112. 72. My Carter spacer was in 65.
Had the car handle.
Yeah, my Carter handle, exactly.
Yeah, okay. But there were two versions, two types of the first version.
The brass spacer and then the steel.
Oh, okay, that's what it was.
Yeah, so now we have
Type 2 or variation 2, first version, black micarta handle, 2-line stamp, steel spacer. Then we have variation or first version, variation 3 or type 3, steel spacer, black micarta handle, Buck 112 USA. These are pretty hard to get. There was only a short run of those. I'm guessing that they probably just had a few of these handled already done and they were getting ready to head into the wood handle and they just used them up, you know.
I've never seen one of those.
Really? Yeah, I've got one new in the box. I actually got a couple of those new in the box.
You shouldn't have told them that.
Then next was going into what they call sedula wood, which is a light grain tan wood. And these were 72, probably up right running into 73, and into sedula wood handle, the little handle pin, steel spacer, 3-line stamp, but with the sedula wood handle. So then next we have a 3-liner ebony handle with the small handle pin, steel spacer, Buck 112 USA. Next we have the sintered brass 3-liner. And you can get a definite change here between these two because this one was kind of thin, you know, a little, just a smaller handle grip to it, and once again up to the sintered brass, the frame thickens up, the handle thickens up. Thumb depression is lighter too also. And next we have first 2-dot, has the 3 small handled pins, sintered brass frame with Buck 112 with the 2 little dots. And we have the one with the 4 handle pins. Then with the 2 little handle pins, and then on up into the big handle pins.
So the 2-dot would still signify a change in blade material.
And the rocker, the lock bar, and no, the 2-dot was to signify the changing of the tang and the lock bar.
Unlike the 110 where the 2-dot signified a blade change.
No, the 4-dot
4-dot.
signified the blade change. And the same thing with the 112 kind of follows along here from this point on. You know, they did go into a nail nick. You know, the early ones, none of them had the nail nick. Then they decided to put the nail nick on the 112. The first ones, I believe, were a 3-dot 112. Was the first nail nick a 3-dot? Yeah, it was, huh? They had a 3-dot with no nail nick and with a nail nick.
Yeah, I left my notes back at the hotel.
The third one, what's the handle material?
black micarta. Yeah, it's a 3-liner steel spacer, black micarta handle. I don't think there was very many of those that were put out. Yes, the 112s are fun to collect. When I try to get people interested in collecting, I try to get them because all of them are still collectible.
To try to get, The 110s are tough. You know, if you're going to get back in the early stuff, it's extremely tough to try to find all that stuff. I mean, you know, I've got 40 years into it. You know, that's a long time.
Well, I see any,
Finger grooves came in. The first finger groove 112 came in around 82, 83, and it was a 3-dot. Same on the 110, but the 110 was a 4-dot when it came
what year was that? About the same.
in, right around the same time.
George, the difference between the second one and the third one was the 2-line and 3-line on the Makata handle?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it possible to put those on as 81? I thought I brought one other one.
Finger groove 81.
Is that possible?
You know, that answered my notes.
No, I think I did, but I could be wrong. I know I brought them too.
Because I had one customized, an early 110, you know, back then, customized with finger grips, you know, and then I remember when they came out with that, and I thought, oh man, now they're finger gripping them, because that was like, you know, back when we first started carrying buck knives, if you could get somebody to custom finger grip your 110, that was custom back then. I mean, it didn't get much more custom.
How much?
There were no nail nicks from 72 to 80 on the 112.
That's right.
Started with a nail nick in 81.
Yeah, on a 3-dot, and you'll see a 3-dot with no nail nick and with a nail nick. Okay, I think I have pictures of the boxes too, but they didn't make it on there, so who knows where they went.
What was that one?
That's a rocker pin.
So we're not counting that.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do it. Yeah, just, yeah, the inlay pin.